Hey everybody, welcome back. Boyle Lewis and Roger Chafian here with another Masters of the Air review. This time for episode 3, which covers the 100 bomb group's portion of the Schweinfurt-Regensburg reg. How you doing today, Boyle?
I'm doing fantastic, Roger. Thanks so much for having me back and just super excited to dive into episode 3 here.
Always love to have you here. But without further ado, let's jump in because I think we have an awful lot to cover on
Yeah,
this one.
I think so.
So, we'll start right from the top and let's talk about what actually happened. We'll get to the
Okay.
episode in a little bit, but let's give everyone a little background because as we'll hear as we get to the reviews, my little bit of complaint with this episode is not enough context for the listener who doesn't know what's going on.
That's
And
right.
this was the first shuttle raid that the U.S. Army Air Force did in Europe in the war. So what is a shuttle raid and why did we do it?
So the shuttle raid is they're going to, before, as we saw in episode 1 and 2, they take off from England, they fly to their target, and then they fly back to England. And, tactically and operationally, you're going to get hit by flak both inbound and outbound because you're basically going the same route. And then same with the Luftwaffe are able to hit you as you're coming inbound, and then you go to your target. They land, rearm, and refuel, and there's enough time for them to be up at altitude to meet the bombers heading back. And
Right.
so the thought, and then there's also with winds and weather. We talked about that the last episode. Depending on how far you're going to go into Germany, it's really pushing the limits of what the B-17 can do. And so the thought was, okay, we'll go from England, we'll go deep into Germany, for Regensburg for the 100th bomb group that we see in the episode. And then we're just going to keep going. And then this way, we miss the flak, and the fighters will expect us to be going back in the opposite direction. So it's something that's unexpected. And then we'll keep pressing down to the south, cross the Med into Algeria.
Exactly. And this was the largest Army Air Force bomber raid to date, 376 bombers. They covered that. But in all fairness to our allies, the RAF had been doing this for several years previously. So this was not the largest Allied bombing raid to date, which I think they claimed in the series. The RAF had actually executed, I think it was 4 what they called 1,000 bomber raids in 1942. That was stretching the term a little bit. They were scraping the bottom of the barrel. It was taking planes from training commands
It
and
was.
training
Yes.
instructors. So a little bit of creative license there, but we'll take it and we'll see what happens in future episodes because there were definitely larger U.S. Army Air Force raids to come.
There are, yes. As the buildup happens, as the war machine of the United States gets geared up and they're able to push those resources into England to be able to really make the 8th Air Force what they thought it could be since its inception.
Exactly. And this raid comes at the time just after something called the Point Blank Directive, which was the guidance to turn from economic based warfare or logistics based warfare to actually destroy the Luftwaffe. And you want to talk a little bit about that, Boyle? Like what is the difference there and how you're constructing a bombing mission?
Absolutely. So with the Point Blank Directive came out in the summer of 1943, and we had talked last episode about the Casablanca Conference that really solidified the combined bomber offensive, but still was going after industrial targets. Well, in the summer of 43, after the agreement had been made at the Casablanca Conference 6 months prior about we're going to do Operation Overlord, the cross-channel invasion into mainland Europe, and that will happen at the time, it was decided 1 May 1944. And so that was their target date. And one of the absolute prerequisites that they must meet in order for this to happen is to have air superiority over Western Europe. And in order to do that, then they would have to seek out and facilitate the destruction of the Luftwaffe. So that was Operation Point Blank. From the strategic leaders from both the British side and the American side said, okay, no more industrial targets, or maybe we'll hit some, but our number one focus is destroying the Luftwaffe. And we can do that both in the air and on the ground. So the ground piece now is we're going to go after aircraft factories. We're going to go after what fuels the aircraft, oil and refineries, and we are also going to go after ball bearing facilities. You know, that comes up often in other World War II movies or shows. We're going to hit the ball bearings because no piece of machinery can run without ball bearings. And again,
Exactly.
like the combined bomber offensive, on paper, this seems like a great idea. If I can knock out their ball bearing factories, then holy smokes,
Right.
none of their future machinery is going to be able to work at all. So that explains the shift and why the 100 Bomb Group in particular was tasked with hitting an aircraft factory there in Regensburg.
Right. And worth noting that the German attempts in 1940, whether they would have been able to or not, actually invade England, uh, very parallel to the discussions of the PRC in Taiwan for
That's right.
modern day. Could they really? But the prerequisite that they never achieved, so they never even tried, was control of the air and the destruction of RAF's fighter command. So learning
That's
from
right.
that, this was the goal. And there were two bombardment wings of multiple groups, the first and the third at this point active. This is August 43, so the run up to the uh,
Hmm.
original May 1944 date you were talking about for Overlord. And earlier in the Point Blank raids, they had attacked the Focke-Wulf 190 factories and had suffered very heavy losses. But the BDA, or bomb damage assessment, had indicated the damage was significant. It was justified. So let's go ahead and do this and attack the Messerschmitt BF 109 factories along with the ball bearing factories.
That's right.
We could talk about the Messerschmitt and the Focke-Wulf. It's fascinating. I'd like to see if they bring it up more later in the series and not steal their thunder. And if they don't, we can talk to the listeners about them at that point. If
Okay,
you're
that
okay
sounds
with
good.
that. Yeah.
That sounds great. Yep.
So they did bring out in the episode that it was going to be sort of a two element raid, and there was going to be the deception plan that you discussed earlier, and that the third bomb wing was going to lead. That includes the 100th bomb group. The third was under Curtis LeMay. They were going to go attack Regensburg, which was the Messerschmitt factory. So, again, a little bit of creative license there when he holds up the ball bearing in the brief, which I thought those briefs were very well done from what I've read and what I've seen in terms of how they
That's exactly
recreated
right.
them. But as you said, it's always the ball bearings, right? Well, the 100th wasn't going for the ball bearings. They were going for the Messerschmitt factory.
They were.
Yeah. Whereas the first bomb group under Colonel Robert Williams was going to attack the Schweinfurt complex, which was the ball bearings. And so you want to talk about what was the intention there? Because I felt like they didn't exactly play it out the way it happened. And so let's give the listener an idea for what was supposed to happen, and then we'll talk about what happened with the breakdown in timing.
Absolutely. So the thought was, well, we've been sending single packages of as many bombers as we can muster into Germany. They get hit by flak, they get hit by fighters, they bomb their target, they hit by fighters, hit by flak, all the way back. By this point, there's no long range fighter escort for the U.S. or the RAF. So the thought here was, okay, we'll do a two-pronged attack. And what that will look like is the third bomb wing will go in first on their way to Regensburg, and the Luftwaffe will come up and meet them, and then they'll press under their target. And as we mentioned already, they're going to keep going down across Italy, across the Med, and then go to Algeria. Well, as they are doing that, then we'll have the first bomb wing they will launch on their way to Schweinfurt. And now the air defense system in Germany isn't going to know what to do because they've never been confronted with two separate large packages, and they're going to be stuck on the third bomb wing. So the 100th bomb group, the folks that we're following, the Schweinfurt folks will be able to make it in unmolested by fighters to their target, and then they'll bomb their targets. And on their way out, maybe if the air defenses come back online, all they're going to have to face is flak, and at the worst, they will only have to face fighters on their outbound legs. So the third bomb wing will fight their way in, and then, in theory, easy way out. And the first bomb wing will only have to fight their way out. And so we'll reduce the amount of threat exposure. But this required great coordination of time and assets. And we'll see, as we saw in the episode, it quickly started to break down. But it was a timing issue that this was critical, that everyone had to push and launch at the same time, push at the same time in order for this deception to work.
Right. I think you actually almost directly quoted, or at least repeated Donald Miller's quote from the book. Donald Miller's the author who wrote the book upon which the series is based, but that LeMay would fight his way in and Williams would fight his way out.
That's right.
What I felt didn't get brought through was that the timing breakdown that we'll talk about here momentarily really isn't why the 100th got hit so hard. It was they were always going to get hit. That was the plan. Was you're going to, I mean, I'm going to use some high level military technology here. It's going to suck. You know, it sucks to be on point, and that's what's going to happen. But you're not going to deal with it on the way out. So the 100th and the 3rd Bomb Wing didn't really get hit any worse than they would have had the timing been right. Really, the 1st bombardment wing that we did not see depicted here, other than the little, the counters moving across the map. They're the ones who really took the brunt of the failure, because they then did get hit on the way in and the way out.
That's exactly right. They did.
Yeah. But as we said, things did not quite go as planned. And nope. I think we'll get into that with the episode review here next. But I do want to say, so one thing about why the 100th got hit so badly, I don't know if you've read about this, Boyle, is the way they grouped the 3rd bombardment wing. What happened to the 100th there?
So for the 100th, the way they group them is you're going to have higher aircraft. You're not going to have everybody on the same altitude. You're going to have bombers stacked at different altitudes, and it depended on the group. And the 100th was the tail end Charlie, or I think Donald Miller in his book, they call it the Purple Heart Corner.
Yeah.
Because that is where you got hit the most. You're at the lowest altitude, so easier for the fighters to attack you. If you started to get out of formation, it was easier for you to start moving your way from the bigger formation. It was a lot easier, I'm sorry, for the fighters to influence that to happen, and then be able to pick you off when you're away from the larger, semi-protective umbrella of all of the interlocking fields of fire from the bombers. And so the 100th, they knew going into this, oh my goodness, we are in the tail end Charlie 1, and Gale Clevin is in the tail end Charlie part of the formation of the tail end Charlie with his squadron that he's leading.
Yeah, so it's going to be a rough day. One thing I read that the author even said may be apocryphal, and this was in Edward Jablonski's Flying Fortress, is that, and I hopefully we're not spoiling anything here, but the 100th Bomb Group became known as the Bloody 100th in the 8th Air Force. And I did read something that even Edward Jablonski in the book said, this may be apocryphal, we don't have records, but there are many eyewitness accounts who claim that what happened that caused the 100th to be so savagely attacked for the rest of the war. Have you heard this story at all?
No.
Of what happened? So allegedly there was a B-17 from the group that had taken significant battle damage and had fallen out of formation. And at this time in the war, it was agreed upon sort of tacitly between the Allies and the Germans that if your bomber was wounded, was damaged, and you dropped your landing gear, that was I surrender, right? I will land somewhere. And as the story goes, one of the 100th bombers was severely damaged, broke out of formation, dropped their landing gear, and a gaggle of Luftwaffe fighters then formed around it to lead it to a Luftwaffe base. And for reasons that, as will become apparent, no one knew or will ever know if this actually happened, at some point, the B-17 apparently felt maybe they could make a run for it. They pulled up their landing gear. The gunners started shooting at the Luftwaffe fighters and shot a couple of them down.
Oh, wow.
The fighters all jumped this guy and shot him down. But from that moment on, the story goes, the Luftwaffe had it out for the 100th in particular, because they felt that they had been, which I get. We sort of feel that way from the stories all the way back to the Gulf War, right? Of the white flags, and then it's an attack. And, if we roll back to episode 1, there's a point where they're painting the D on the tail of all the aircraft. So it was very clear what bomb group you were attacking. So just a little
that's
bit. Don't know if
exactly
it's true, but in any event. So let's get into the episode review itself, and we'll start with the weather itself and the weather delay. I
Okay.
felt that was right on. It was pretty accurate. That's what happened.
I felt it was right on too. And I think what's important to remember is you could take off in bad weather, in foggy weather. There are ways to do that. You have your instruments, although rudimentary compared to today. They could line up trucks and put lights down the runway so you don't go off the runway. So there's ways to overcome that. The problem is the reason they are delaying, and then you think, well, if they could take off and the 100th is going to Algeria, what's the problem? Well, the problem is the other bomb wing is coming back to England. And as we saw, I think in episode 2, even during training, it was dangerous. B-17 in the background, augers in because he turned too tightly, and it was a beautiful day. There were so many accidents that happened in midair collisions that happened in bad weather. And so what they're hoping is that the fog will burn off so that on the return, the Schweinfurt bomb wing will have clear weather to be able to land back in England, because that kind of weather you cannot land in.
Right. And then additionally, there was a brief bit where Babyface is talking with the rest of his crew and says, why can't we take off? And one of the guys says, well, there could be a cow on the runway. And some people may think that that's insane, but I don't know if the Marines have this. The Air Force actually has some specialists, and some of their particularly C-17, like forward capable transport pilots, that they have special varmint guns they use for this. They have guys who are trained to shoot varmints on the runway so that you don't have that collision in the fog damage. So I thought that was pretty interesting to bring that out.
And that is true. There are folks who work on every military airfield, and they're there for kind of bird control and wildlife control. Deer, we had a F-18 hit a hog once in Beaufort, South Carolina. Anyway, it is still a problem.
Yeah. And if you've ever hit a deer or anything larger with your car,
That's right.
And your car, they pointed it out, this is an aluminum can. We're not going to do well if this happens. The other piece was, so we know that the fog is there, and they're waiting, and they were supposed to launch at 6:30, but now it's 0800. It's 8 in the morning, and LeMay says, we're going to go. My group's going to go. And I felt like you could read into that LeMay's aggressiveness, that if you've read about the war, LeMay was a very aggressive leader, very aggressive throughout the war and the Cold War. But there was another piece to it, which was, had the third not launched by 0800, they would not make it to Algeria in daylight. So this whole raid was going to fall apart if they didn't launch.
That's exactly right. And the shuttle raid, as we saw, as we'll get to, very rudimentary. In fact, is barely dirt cleared off in the shape of a runway.
Right.
No lights, no support. It was going to be, if they landed after the sun had went down, it was going to be an unmitigated disaster.
Right. And that wasn't something that the U.S. Army Air Forces had trained for in general, right? To the RAF's credit, again, with their night raids, they were used to landing at night. They were used to landing sort of maybe in that morning twilight, but not something we were capable of. So I felt that was very accurate. I felt it was portrayed well. And then, as we discussed, it did show the third bomb wing, or bomb wing having to lead alone. But as we said, that was always the plan. And as you mentioned, the first was delayed so much. You saw that dramatic moment. I think it was 3 hours behind the first. Well, that just meant that the Luftwaffe had that perfect opportunity to land, rearm, come back up, and hit inbound and outbound. I thought it was interesting, but maybe not germane to the story, so I understand why they didn't clutter the storyline, that they didn't mention the fact that there were escort fighters for this mission. Though they would later in the war, they did not cover themselves in glory, as it were, on this mission.
That's right.
Yeah. Do you want to dive into that and give a little detail, or I can?
Yeah, so I'll start, and then I'll hand it back to you, Roger. So the fighters at this time, they could only really make it just to the border of Germany, so they could make it over without external fuel tanks. And I think we'll end up talking more about that in later episodes when they bring in the Tuskegee Airmen and P-51s. But at this time, we've got P-47s, great fighter aircraft, but it just doesn't have the legs, even with external tanks, to be able to make it all the way deep into Germany. It just can't do it. And we've talked about the timing piece with the bombers already. There's also a timing piece and bad weather for the fighters as well. And so this is where they start running into problems with, okay, we've got to join up on the bombers. We've got to launch as well. Our timing is messed up. Theirs is messed up. And how do you coordinate that with just, making phone calls back and forth to different towers to
Right.
different airfields? Very, very challenging to do.
Right. And, for you as a Marine aviator, for me as a surface air defense guy, I'm used to the idea that the carrier is going to launch a package and it's going to be very homogenous. It's going to be very holistic. That's not how these missions ran. The bombers were going to take off. Over England was considered safe. The English Channel was considered safe. The fighters were going to rendezvous somewhere over Belgium, Holland, France. So it's not like, to your point, you would have to call tower to tower. You'd have to figure out what's going on. And in the event, there were two groups of P-47s, as you said, that were supposed to come and at least escort both groups to the border of Germany. Only one group of those two managed to rendezvous, and it only covered the lead elements. It would not have helped the 100th at all. And at the end of the day, those fighters did not encounter any Luftwaffe fighters. So I understand why they left that out, but an interesting piece as we move forward into later episodes, that as the bombers are learning, the fighters are learning. And, by 1944, it's a pretty devastating team. The little friends and the big friends, as we'll probably hear they're called later in later episodes, but did not work today.
It did not. And one last piece on the fighters is, at the time when they would join up on the bombers, they would do what's called close escort, meaning the fighters would slow all the way down to the bomber speed. They would kind of be shepherd them along on the outside of the big bomber formation, doing close escort. So that was the tactic of the time. And I think we'll see in later episodes how both technology and tactics change and evolve for like you just said, Roger, for a very successful team. But
Yeah.
we are not there yet.
We are not there. So some of the things they portrayed, they definitely displayed the way the B-17 could take battle damage. And for those of you who have listened to our first episode 1 and 2 review, you know that Boyle is watching this with his daughter.
That's right.
I'm watching this with my wife, and she looked at me and said, I don't even understand how that plane can fly anymore. And we're cutting in some actual photos of battle damaged B-17s, but they were incredibly resistant to battle damage, coming home with just some amazing levels of damage.
Absolutely.
So I felt that the battle damage was well portrayed. The scenes of bailing out were well portrayed, and we're going to look at a clip here in just a minute that really discusses that in a very heartbreaking way. Anyone who's watched the episode already knows what we're going to talk about in a moment. But I thought that was done well. And again, we'll talk about that here in a second. I want to mention we got a listener comment from the first episode that said one thing they felt was not portrayed well was that after a crewman was wounded, you had this emotional and physical trauma of 3, 4, 5 hours getting back to base. And I felt that was a really good and accurate comment. And as we get to the end, this philosophy will apply, at least for me as well, in my review. I'm hoping that we're going to build, and we're just going to build and build on concepts and not try and give the listener too much all at once. But I felt like this episode did at least start to build on this idea of, now that you're familiar from 1 and 2 with B-17 bombing raids, now we're going to really show you about battle damage, and we're really going to show you that it's not even far from an ejection seat. It is not the sort of, John Wayne stand on the edge of the canopy, salute and jump, right?
That's exactly
it's
right.
not all that.
It is not. It is brutal, harsh environment that no human being has ever fought in before. We don't understand the physiological effects of it at the time we're trying to, or the doctors were trying to. And like the listener pointed out, you get wounded, you've got a long time before you're going to see. There's no corpsman or medic on the plane. Maybe they have morphine that somebody will jab in you to take some of the pain away. But you are along for the ride. There's no foxhole to hop in to hide. You are still a target the entire rest of the time, even while you're wounded.
And you as a Marine, I imagine, even so than my relatively limited, ground training and expeditionary warfare, you don't treat the wounded till the fight's over, right? You got to stay in the fight unless you're a corpsman. You stay in the fight because you can't help your buddy if you get shot. So you stay in the fight. Right. These gunners are having to keep staying in the fight while their buddy's laying there wounded. And to your point of not having corpsmen, they didn't even have the level of medical knowledge if you weren't a medic or a corpsman. No. I thought that was really well portrayed. If anyone goes back to Saving Private Ryan, I'm going to imagine everyone has seen that movie by now. So spoiler alert, if you've not seen Saving Private Ryan, don't listen to the next 90 seconds. But, there's that scene of the attack on the pillbox, and their squad medic or platoon medic gets wounded, and he's laying there bleeding out, and his squad's looking at him saying, tell us what to do, tell us what to do, tell us what to do.
That's right. Yes.
So, those kids, and they were kids, and these bombers are having to deal with that as well. So to our listener who brought that up, I think you have an excellent point, and my hope is we're going to see that brought out more as time goes by. But what I'd like to do now is let's go ahead and take a look at our first clip, and we'll watch it through, and then we'll talk about what we saw in the bailout process.
Okay.
Should we bail, Roy? Roy! Should we bail? Should we bail? How's the crew? Abandoned ship, bail out! Abandoned ship, bail out! Did you say abandoned ship? Yes, goddammit! Destroy the orders and bail! Pilots and bombardier, open the bomb bay doors! Roger! Torch, sabo the bombs! Clutch is jammed! It won't crank! Help me out! Quinn, come on, help me, man! Push! Pull on the count of three! Try it! 1, 2, 3! Come on! Push, baby, baby! Help me! Come on, Quinn! Please! Come on, get me out of here, please! I'm sorry. What do you mean? No! No! Come back, Quinn! Quinn, please! I can't! Get me out of this thing! No! I can't! Please! Quinn! I'm sorry, babyface! No! I'm sorry. No!
So that's
Wow.
Yeah. A lot to cover there. And I think I've said this before in other interviews, like when I've been talking with Shine about stuff. So please remember you're listening to two guys who got trained from a very young age to be just very matter of fact. So if we seem callous as we discuss this, it's just sort of that's our training, right? We'll go cry in our beer when we're off the air, so to speak.
That's right.
But let's take a look at this from some of the process stuff. And from what I've read, the bailout sequence was really well done from that very first moment of, hey, should we bail out from the co-pilot?
That's right. I thought so too. And I thought, there was the discussion between the pilot and the co-pilot. So he's the aircraft commander. Just before that clip, he was talking about, hey, he's having to physically hold it straight and level and put a lot of muscle into it, and very hard aircraft to fly. The co-pilot's having to help him. I think that's part of the calculation. There's no way we can wrestle this thing for another, 7 hours to Algeria. It's on fire. Pieces are coming off. Things are not looking good. And then they make the decision together. And then, kind of training takes over almost as they start going through the process and the steps that they have.
Yeah. And you saw, he told the crew by voice, he sounded the buzzer. These were all the things they did, because there's no ejection seat. There's no command ejection like on modern aircraft. They salvo the bombs, right? Because, of course, in a burning aircraft, you want to get rid of everything that might blow you up prematurely that you want to. And it was pretty accurate. I don't think the whole crew went out the bomb bay. There were different options.
It didn't look like it, or they didn't show that.
Yeah. I think that there were other hatches for other guys, but I like that they showed that the bomb bay was an option. And then they definitely showed the fact that guys got trapped in these things in different ways. Guys got trapped in the ball turret. Guys would get trapped in the tail turret. They showed Quinn, who we'll come back to later, getting pinned against the fuselage by the G-force as the plane started spinning. And that's all very realistic. I mean, you're more familiar with G than I am, but I mean, G restrained is a tough thing to deal with. Unrestrained, it must have been horrendous in these bulky flight suits.
That's right. Everything's flying around. You could see all the stuff flying around. One little piece that I liked was Quinn. You see him eating paper. Those were the codes, and they wrote that on rice paper. And the procedure was, if you're going to bail out, you eat it, and it's edible. Well, I'm air quoting edible.
Right. Yeah.
So it doesn't fall into enemy hands. And I really like that kind of little touch that they had.
Right. And that's real. I mean, I'm not sure if they'd been on a couple more missions if he'd just say, F this, I got to get out of this bird. But I know it's the process. Like on a ship, as weird as it sounds, when we did abandoned ship drills, the combat systems team, unenviable position of, well, one of your duties if you're the senior leadership in combat systems is magnets and sledgehammers down to where all the classified drives and the Tomahawk computers and the Aegis computers, and smash all this stuff just in case the ship doesn't sink. And you're sort of going, we're abandoning the ship because the ship's sinking and I'm down in one of the lower parts of the ship. Smash it. I don't like this idea, but you do what you have to do. I have read some criticism online about how that scene gets portrayed there at the end, that it was prolonged, that it, like even to the point, well, Quinn didn't have his intercom plugged in. So how did he hear Babyface talking from the ball turret? This is a place where I think, and I'm interested to hear your point of view, I think creative license was used correctly here. Because if you're in a B-17, your buddy's trapped in the ball turret. He's struggling to get out. If you're seeing him there, this is what's happening. It's going through your mind in the flash of an eye. It doesn't take as long as what's seen there. You don't need to hear the intercom, and you have to make a life or death decision. So I think that while it wasn't necessarily exactly true to life and how it would happen, it gave the novice viewer a very good feeling for the emotional trauma that these crews would have. And I'll be interested to see if there's survivor guilt later on. And it's also pretty hard to criticize Quinn. What are you going to do?
That's right. And again, an awful, awful scene, totally gut wrenching, but maybe would it have played out like, did it play out like that? Who knows? And I think that's, like you said, Roger, that's beside the point. It's a good way to portray some of the really hard, awful, awful choices that these young men had to make. Juxtapose. You have Quinn and Babyface. This one, the choice is I can stay here and keep pulling on this door that's not going to open, and we both die, or I can get out now. And that's the choice that Quinn makes. Juxtapose against Kurt Biddick, which I think we're going to talk about here in a second. So the same choice, but same kind of dilemma, but different decisions are made.
Right. So, yeah, let's jump to that now, and we'll look at Kurt Biddick, whose co-pilot has been grievously wounded. They're at first not sure if he's dead or not, but we'll go ahead and take a look at that now.
I'm gonna get you down safely. You hear me? You can't land this thing, can you? Yes, I can. If we drop him, he'll die. Drop him. It's his best chance. He's gonna die anyway, Lieutenant. No, he's not. We have to fail. Come on. Go. I'll be right behind you. Go. Promise me. I'll be behind you. I'm gonna keep her level till everyone bails out. Go. You gotta get out, Kurt. I'm right behind you. Get out. I'm getting us down, Dick. I have control. Right over there, you see it? That long field, all right? Just stay with me, come on. Come on, Kurt, fly like an angel, all right?
So, again, pretty sobering. Let's start with, we already talked about, you have a decision to make. And as the pilot of an aircraft, why don't you talk about that, Boyle, and I know you flew single seat, right?
I did, yes.
Almost exclusively. But, the pilot in command responsibility.
So it was interesting because a lot of we've heard it in the episodes we've seen so far, they refer to the B-17 as their ship. Mm-hmm. So like a captain of a ship, that was the thought process. You were responsible for everything that ship does or does not do, and all of the crew member aboard. And so the pilot in command was responsible, and they took that responsibility incredibly seriously about being in charge and having the lives of those men under their command while they were aboard that B-17. Yeah. And the decision that Kurt has made, he knows how grievously wounded the co-pilot is. He knows, they could have pulled him out, slapped a parachute on him, and dumped him out. Pulled the ripcord as he tried. They could have got him under a parachute, but he knew he's going to die. And the best chance for his survival is for me to crash land this thing, at least get us on the ground, and then I'll be able to pull him out of the aircraft. We'll get captured or somebody will come along, but him landing in a parachute is going to equal death. And so the decision that Kurt make is I'm responsible for this crew member, for my co-pilot, and I'm going to try my best to try and save his life.
Right. And, at that point in the war, there was a reasonable expectation that the Germans were going to treat captured airmen fairly well. Right.
That's right.
It's a whole different discussion of different theaters of war and different enemies. But at this point for the 8th Air Force, there was a fairly high expectation, especially if the Luftwaffe got you, not the Gestapo, not the SS, that you were going to get as good a medical treatment as you could under the circumstances. Now, I'm interested of your perspective from a pilot. I was looking at that field going, okay, I've seen movies before, and is this reasonable? And what went wrong?
I think what went wrong was when they hit the trees, and even you see Kurt as he's kind of it jerks, the wing down to the right, I think, and then it noses over, and Kurt knows. He even said, he's like, oh God, because he knows you need to come in at a flat angle, and his plan was a solid one. I'm going to come into this field. Now you have no idea what's in that field. Sure. Is it corn or is it tree stumps?
Right.
It's the Christmas tree farm, and then it's going to be a really bad day trying to land on that. Yeah. But he has a good idea. He tries to do it. He hits the trees, and the thing noses over, and he knows we're going to die.
And you can see it in his face.
And you can see it in his face, and good on the actor's portrayal of that. Did an excellent job with that piece of it. And so that's what went wrong with that. He tried to make it flat, it nosed over, and then that was it.
I read, and again, apocryphal, perhaps. It's hard to say, but what I read came from German sources as well, that is heroic is what we saw portrayed. It might have been even more humanly heroic on Biddick's part, because I have read he was actually trying to avoid a school, or at least what looked like a school or a church, and he was trying to, avoid that. And just the idea that, I think that's sort of I'd like to think every most American Western military man is like, this is my job, but I don't want to have to kill people if I don't have to.
That's right. And Don Miller wrote the same thing in his book, in his extensive research. And so in that case, we can imagine he's coming in nice and flat. Oh my goodness, there's a school in front of me. For that, he has to pull up, and he has no power. He's going to stall. What does that mean? That means you've run out of lift, and now the plane's going to nose over again, and you end up with the same result that we saw in the episode.
Right. So that was Kurt Biddick in the attempt to bring his co-pilot home, and then this episode really sort of gave you the three different options. We're now about to hit the third one, right? There's bailout, right. There's try and crash land, and then there's ditching at sea. And I didn't pull up a clip for this one because it was just a moment, but that comes with its own host of challenges, right? And
it really does.
As a Marine carrier aviator, why don't you talk us through that? Because yeah,
sure. landing on water is like landing on concrete. So water, I mean, we are historians. I'm not somebody who's good at physics, but water is one of those materials on Earth. The harder you hit it, the more compression there is, the more resistance you're going to get from it. And so bringing in a gigantic B-17 bomber going 100 miles per hour, it's like landing on concrete. So it's not this soft, nice little dive in. So you're going to have to survive that. And there's different techniques to try and make that work. Then once you finally come to a full and complete stop, you've got to quickly exit that plane, because first of all, there's giant holes in it already, purposely built, for the waist gunners, for the bomb bay doors might have gotten ripped off. Here comes all this water coming in. It's plexiglass on the nose. That's probably been crushed. And you have maybe a minute to get out before they go. And in Don Miller's book, at least reading his, it sounds like the B-17s, if they could do it successfully, the thing went under pretty quickly. There's 2 life rafts aboard the B-17 for the crew, for them to, kind of get their head on straight after they've landed in the water. Here comes all this rushing water, get the life rafts out, and then get everybody out into the water. They're all wearing their May Wests or their life preservers already. But now you've got survival at sea, so your problems have not ended. Once you've successfully made this incredibly hard aerial maneuver, which is landing on water, then you've escaped from the sinking aircraft. You've made it out into the raft, and now here you are adrift in the middle of the Mediterranean.
Right.
Your problems are, your day is not over.
Yeah. Right. Your new problem day has just begun.
That's exactly right.
When we would do SAR missions, SAR exercises, and actually participated in some SARS search and rescue missions, it was always sort of a dark humor as you would look. We have tables on the ships that would say, okay, here's the ellipse curve of your survival time in water based on the temperature. And the med in August is probably not that horrible, but still not great. You need to get out of the water. You need to get in your raft. But we would always sort of drop the other temperature curve on it, because just about the time the curve said you can survive in this water for a while, the chance of shark attack is higher. So, we'd always sort of joke about that, like, well, and then, to your point of now you're here and you're somewhere. Did you ever have to do an abandoned ship drill on the carrier? I imagine that would be an immense undertaking if you ever did.
No, we did not. We did not. They ran man overboard drills all the time, but that was more of an accountability drill than, hey, everybody jump off.
Yeah, so they would do abandoned ship drills on a small buoy And it wouldn't be everybody because you kept the guys on watch and you'd go muster where your lifeboat station was. But part of the navigation team's job would be to read off, and you've always got a pen, right? If you're in uniform, you've always got a pen, and you're writing on your arm or the back of your hand, and they're telling you, okay, this is the lat long where we are. These are the sea conditions. This is the wind. This is the temperature. And then the last thing was always nearest land bears like 025 magnetic. All right, cool. Nearest land is 1,200 miles away. And you're like,
That's right.
and then they go, nearest land is enemy held. And we're all going, I don't care at that point. You know, I don't care whose it is if I make it 1,200 miles. But to that point, it's, yeah, you're in the middle of the ocean, maybe in a raft. And if there was that point where they said, hey, mark his location, right? Because there was a system to go back and find these guys. And I like the fact that they portrayed that. And something I don't think you and I talked about as we were preparing for this, but I noticed was the navigator, who his name's escaping me right now, but the
Crosby.
Yes. At one point, he looks at the bombardier and says, what time did we, I think it was, what time did we salvo bombs? Right.
Yeah.
And he's like, I don't think anyone recorded that. And he was just like, but I need to record that. And I just thought to myself, the nuance in filmmaking there, because that wasn't, for me, that wasn't about a guy who's like, oh, I'm really uptight and anal and I need to record when I salvo the bombs. All that adrenaline just dumped out of that guy. And
That's right.
half of his friends are gone. And he doesn't know if he's going to make it to Algeria. And as you said before, you revert to your training. And I know for me, at least in stressful moments, find a task to focus on and get yourself recentered and get back in the fight. And I felt like that just portrayed that really well.
I thought it did too. You know, you had two different approaches. You had the bombardier who's kind of staring pensively out over the water, munching on a snack, and probably ruminating about what a horrible day this has been. And like you said, Crosby's like, nope, I'm going to focus on my tasks to be able to make it through this horrible day that we've just had.
Right. So the other alternative, of course, after all this battle damage, to bail, crash, ditch, is we're running out of fuel. We don't know if we're going to make it to Algeria. We don't want to go in the water. So dump everything out of the aircraft. And again, my wife sort of looked at me and was like, did they really do that? I said, absolutely.
Absolutely.
So let's watch this clip. And then I, especially for you as a pilot, let's talk about weight and how important weight is to a pilot as opposed to me in my 10,000 ton cruiser.
We're under 600, sir.
Pilot to navigator, we got just under 600 gallons left.
Can we get us to Africa? No, mate. It looks like we might need more like 750 at present speed. We've been leaking fuel since the IP.
Roger. Lead pilot to crew. We need to stretch our range as much as possible. Dump everything now bolted down. Bombsite, guns,
Ammo, everything.
Bombardier pilot! You saved my bomb site?
we're over water, Norm. Krauts won't get it.
Let it go. Release the turret. Pilot to top turret. How we looking up there? Pretty ragged, but okay, sir. Garrison, how are the stragglers looking back there? DeMarco's clean. Cleven's dumping now. Looks like Van Noy's gonna ditch in the water. Navigator to pilot. Van Noy ditched smoothly in water, approximately 350 miles from land.
Roger.
So,
Wow.
yeah. Before we get into the weight thing, I don't want to forget the Norden bombsite. Like, why was that a big deal? Why did they put in that nuance? again, I watched it with my wife, and she's like, well, were these like specially fitted? She looked at me, it's like, was it like you and your rifle and your optic? Are you just particularly attached to how you? I said no. The deal was they were so classified, they weren't supposed to get rid of those things. Like they were brought out to the planes under armed guard.
They were. I think it was in episode 1 that we see very briefly the folks bring it out. And it's in a little special case, and he's armed, and he brings it out. And so the worry was it would fall into German hands because the Germans had nothing like this kind of technology. And even as inaccurate as it was still the most accurate bombing site in the world. And nobody had figured out how to make something like that.
Right. And so the fact that it was being thrown into the Mediterranean, hey, you're good to go. The crowds aren't going to get it. But we see everything going. We see 50 cals going. We see ammunition going. And, if you've never lifted a 50 cal, they're pretty heavy. Quick side note here. Tiny, if you're listening, Tiny is one of my gunner's mates in the security den I commanded. The only man I've ever met who could do manual at arms with a 50 cal. It was impressive. But Boyle, talk to us about weight for an aircraft and how much difference things that seem inconsequential to us non-aviators really are.
Sure. So there's 4 forces at work when you're flying. You have lift, weight, thrust, and drag. And so the lift is what's keeping you airborne, but there's also drag with that. And with a shot up B-17, and we saw in that clip, a hunk of the tail went flying off as well. So it is not the most aerodynamic piece of gear. So it's generating a tremendous amount of drag. Then there's thrust, and that's what you're getting from the engines. And the more you push up on the power, the more thrust you're going to get, and the faster you're going to go, and the more lift you could potentially produce. But the more I push up on the engines, the more fuel I'm burning. So I'm using thrust to push my weight through the sky. And if I lessen my weight, then what I can do now is I can maintain the same amount of thrust, but with less power on the aircraft. And so by doing that, they can now reduce their power, which reduces their fuel flow and their fuel consumption, and allows them to stretch that 600 pounds that they're showing on the needle to equal the 750 that were actually required. And they're just trying to do every single thing that they can to be able to maximize their gas. And to do that, they got to dump all that weight so they can reduce their fuel consumption.
Mm-hmm. And even, the plane has dropped its probably nominally 4,000 pound bomb load. I don't recall the gross weight of the B-17, but at this point, hundreds of pounds, close to 100 pounds per 50 cal, right? Yeah. And then the ammo included, 11 of those or 13 of those, that's, half a ton. Yeah. Right there that you're getting rid of, and then everything else.
And then the ball turret, who knows how much that...
Right, I had forgotten until I saw that. I'm like, oh yeah, that was jettisonable, and that's...
Yeah. And the guns attached to it, boom, that thing goes.
Again, a nice little touch in the filmmaking there. The 50 cals were out of the top turret. They didn't just stick a guy in the top turret set. I thought that was pretty cool. One thing that was not mentioned, and one thing that was, they used something called Tokyo tanks on this mission, which was quite a misnomer, because they were never used in the Pacific. Because even with them, the B-17 never had the range to do what the B-29 could. But I think of bombers these days, and the B-1 or the B-52 can actually put tanks in its bomb bay and trade off weaponry.
Yeah.
These Tokyo tanks actually were extra tanks they put in the wing. So these guys had a lot of fuel on board, but even there, it was stretching to get to Algeria. The other thing they showed was feathering the props. So why don't you talk us through what that means?
So feathering your normal propeller, it is facing forward, and as it spins, it bites into the wind, just like a propeller on a boat, right? It bites into the water, bites into the wind, and that's how it's able to pull itself through the air and then create motion and create thrust. And so that's how it's able to do that. Well, when your engine conks out or you shut it down, when that propeller blade stops spinning and producing thrust, now it's literally like a barn door and producing a heck of a lot of drag. So now I've got to increase my fuel consumption. It's really messing up how the plane is flying through the sky. It is much more difficult to fly. So when you feather the prop, was the term for it, They would manually pull a lever, and now the propeller blade would go sideways into the wind so much, and it would just kind of slice right through the wind and create almost no drag.
Right.
And so when you shut down a motor in a propeller aircraft like the B-17, you want to feather the prop almost immediately so that you don't get all that drag and create more problems for the aircraft.
Now, was it also unclutched from the engine so it could sort of freewheel if it needed to?
Yes.
Okay, I was wondering because so SWO trivia here, right? Surface warfare trivia. The most efficient way to drive one of our cruisers or destroyers from a fuel standpoint is actually to put one engine driving one shaft and the other three engines shut down. You don't get your top speed, obviously, but we actually do. We just freewheel that other screw at that point.
Yep.
So makes total sense. So that was done well. And then we talked about a little bit earlier, they get to Algeria and, well, there's going to be lobster. What was it? It's
Beer
and lobster. And they landed, and I'll be honest, I had forgotten, right? I was thinking, well, they're going to land at one of these air bases. It's 1943. It's been 6 months since we landed, 6 to 10 months since we landed in Algeria. There's going to be an air base for them there, right? Well, not so much.
Not so much.
Yeah. And that was actually accurate. I think, what was it they said in the book? When they landed, it was some obscure thing like a personnel detachment and a finance detachment or what were there.
That's
and
right.
We'll see if they get to it in the next episode. They're out there like hand pumping gas back into the planes to try and get back home. So I thought that was pretty realistic. And then if that's not too abrupt a change, let's go back to that issue with Quinn bailing out, right? He's jumped out of the plane. He's left Babyface. Now he lands, makes his parachute landing, and he's on the ground in occupied Europe. So let's go take a look at that, and then we'll talk through that.
No, it's okay.
Allemand?
I'm American.
Américain?
Can you help me?
Wait here. Il est américain.
Tu es sûr?
Oui. Is it good?
Yeah.
Venez. Me voilà. Louise, viens. Turn around. Turn around. You will not know my name and you will forget my face, yes?
Yes.
You want to escape back to England?
Yes.
I can help you, but know this. If you turn yourself into the Germans now, you will become a prisoner under the Geneva Conventions, and likely you will survive the war. But if you choose to attempt to escape, you will be treated as a spy if captured, and likely you will be executed. Do you understand?
Yes.
And which you choose? Surrender or escape?
All right.
Yeah. Go ahead. What did you think about that, Boyle?
I thought it was good. I thought I thought it was a lot of explanation for the benefit of the audience. For that, although I haven't read anything about that, I'm almost positive everybody knew that was the deal. That once you take off your uniform, especially in that part of the war and in Western Europe, if you wear your uniform and you surrender, although it's not going to be, very pleasant, you are going to be captured, treated generally under the Geneva Conventions, and put in prisoner of war camp. And I think everybody knew that was the deal. And then if you decide to try and escape, you put on civilian clothes, you're going to be treated much differently and probably captured, tortured, and then shot.
Treated as a spy.
Because you're a spy. And they really want to know about who are these insurgents and spies within their occupied territory.
Right.
They're going to try and get that information out of you. And
Because
so,
as they say, one man's freedom fighter, right? So,
that's right.
So what are we seeing here? You know, first of all, I think the actor did a great job at the end there of that look on his face, like, and he looks so young. He looks
Oh, yes.
so young, and just what do I do? What am I going to do? And I don't want to give anything away about what comes next in Quinn's story. So, but without doing that, we can talk about, you know, who are these people? Well, first of all, I don't think they've said, so I don't want to spoil it for anyone where he is. Right?
Yep.
Is he in France? Is he in Germany? Is he in Belgium? Is he in Holland? Because all these places had different levels of support. Like if you're in Germany, you're getting captured, right? That's
right.
like getting shot.
We know he's
down
not in
over-
Germany.
We know, true. We know he's not in Germany. But where is he? You did find that outside of Germany, the civilians were pretty friendly towards the Western allies. They had varying degrees of severity of Nazi occupation, but all of them pretty universally were pro-Western. And there were very robust resistance movements, and they had these E&E lines or escape and evasion lines that would bring them out. And one, so two little touches there that tie together. The leader of that little cell is carrying a Sten gun, which is a very cheaply made,
That's right.
though good quality British submachine gun that were dropped in the thousands upon thousands into occupied Europe by the British SOE, the Special Operations Executive, the American OSS, Office of Strategic Services. And so I like the nuance of they didn't just give it, it was very appropriate. And the fact that he was very clear that you're not going to see my face again and you're not going to remember my name, because they can't afford to have that whole resistance cell rolled up.
That's exactly right. And my hat's off to the casting director. That guy looks like a resistance fighter.
He
When
does.
came around the corner, I was like, that is a resistance fighter.
That's a resistance fighter. The other guy's a farmer.
Other guy's
That
a farmer.
yeah.
He is clearly a resistance fighter.
Right. And those, so to your point, it was very clear to the airmen that it was not going to be good if they were captured in civilian clothes, because in 1941, if memory serves, Hitler had issued something that called the Commando Order, if I recall properly, after some of the first SOE and raiding force raids, that basically commandos are to be executed on site. So yes, these are pilots, but if they're in civilian clothes, then they're going to be shot. It's not going to go well. Okay. So yeah, let's not talk anymore about the escape and evasion, because I think we're going to hear more about it in future episodes. That's sort of the end of the episode, and we can talk about our review here in a moment. But I wanted to touch a little bit of trivia, with my apologies to German speakers for my atrocious pronunciation of German. I probably should have been paying more attention to the teacher in high school rather than the girl sitting next to me, but we were all young once, right? So the Peenemünde raid ironically took place that night after this Schweinfurt-Regensburg raid happened. And what was that raid, Boyle?
So that raid was the British intelligence had discovered that the Germans were creating, wonder weapons, the Wunderweapons. So the V1 and V2 rockets, which, researching for our podcast tonight, I had no idea the Brits knew about that early in the war, even before they were being utilized, that they knew these things were being developed. Anyway, so the British High Command decided, we're going to try and take out where these things are being manufactured and assembled, which is, I'm not even going to try and pronounce the island name. You did a beautiful job with it, Roger. I'm not even going to try.
Peenemünde, I believe. Yeah.
We are going to, do a kind of an all-out effort to try and take care of this new, and who knows what this threat is going to be, but we know it's scientifically advanced and they're well on their way to finishing it.
Right. And so the British, the RAF, launched what had become for them sort of a well-practiced tactic of the night bombing, and they used Pathfinders, and the raid was moderately effective. But it was an entire mission within a mission within a mission. So the whole operation to take down German wonder weapons was Operation Crossbow, and this particular raid, this night that happened, August night of 17th, 18th, right? You know, the night
right.
after Schweinfurt Regensburg has happened was Operation Hydra. And what was really interesting to me was the U.S. Army Air Force had tried to launch this deception raid. And we're going to launch the 2 bomb wings, and this way we're only going to have to fight one way in and one way out for each wing, and it didn't work. And, you know, we have to give credit to our British cousins in arms. They'd been doing this for a while. I feel like in the United States, they don't get enough credit for what they did with night bombing and electronic bombing and developing this. But they launched a diversion raid of their own called Operation Whitebait, which launched Pathfinders, just the Pathfinders the Germans were used to seeing as the target markers towards Berlin, with the goal of drawing the German night fighter force away from Peenemünde on the Baltic.
That's right.
Towards Berlin, and it was successful.
Very successful.
Right. It saved all but I think the tail end of the bomber stream. And it was so successful that it was essentially the triggering event that led to the Luftwaffe chief of staff, it would be in the U.S. Air Force, but the chief of the Luftwaffe, Hans Juschonek, again, apologies.
Well done, Roger.
Thank you.
Far braver than I am.
He actually committed suicide. Now, there were a number of things that had led up to this with the fate of the Luftwaffe at this point, but how badly the Luftwaffe bit on Operation Whitebait, that deception plan by the RAF, was the final straw that broke the camel's back, if you will. I thought that was a very interesting contrast between the 2 raids.
I thought it was too. And to have it happen on the same exact day as this really kind of disaster for the 8th Air Force. And as you said at the beginning, Roger, we don't see the absolute, if we thought the 100th took a pounding and their 3rd Bomber Wing did, the 1st Bomber Wing really got just shot to pieces, and they lost so many more aircraft than the 3rd Bomber Wing, and that was horrific in its own right. And then the RAF pull off this kind of masterful bit of deception and well thought out plan, and you know, orchestrated. Not only was Whitebait bombing Berlin, but they also had other raids going after Luftwaffe bases to distract them even further. So you had, like you said, a plan within a plan within a plan. And it was just a truly masterful job done by the RAF on the same day, which just shows the contrast between, you know, daylight bombing and the night bombing, and the experience that at this point the RAF had over their American counterparts.
Right. It really puts that scene in the first episode in better context. You know, it's not just we're British, stiff upper lip, and this is how we do it. We night bomb, and you guys are crazy and suicidal. There was a lot of, hey, we've been doing this for a number of years, and you know, the Brits took a pretty good, you know, uppercut to the chin in the first year of the war trying daylight bombing. Oh, yeah. So, but we'll get there, right? I think we'll get there to how the Americans, you know, stay the course and make this work. But you know, I'm not going to spoil anything, but I'm here to tell you, if you don't know the history of the 8th Air Force, it gets worse before it gets better, guys.
That's right.
If you think this is bad, it's going to get ugly coming up here soon. So with that, closing thoughts before we get to ratings.
I thought, again, I'll save it for the ratings, but I thought it was really well done. I think one thing that was missing, this has nothing to do with my rating, is that, again, what we miss out on is that this is just one piece of a larger war. And we have to forget, you know, why Algeria? Why didn't they do this before? Well, North Africa had not been secured yet, really, until that point, until May of 43, with the surrender at Tunis and the Germans and the Italian, what remnants escaped to Sicily. Then you have the invasion of Sicily, and that wrapped up on 17 August. You know, when they finally called, okay, we did it. We have conquered all of Sicily. It was the same day that this raid was happening.
Right.
So it was a wider war going on.
Absolutely. And
It's important to keep in mind.
Oh, I absolutely think so. It's interesting. So there's so many rabbit holes we could go down here with.
Right. Sorry to even bring that up.
No, all good. But when you think about Sicily, and Sicily was captured much more quickly than we anticipated because of something called Operation Mincemeat.
That's right.
I'll let people go look at that on their own. It's a pretty cool story. The Man Who Never Was. The month before this, the largest tank battle in history, or what is claimed as the largest tank battle in history, there's a little bit of debate, happens at the Battle of Kursk. Prokhorovka is the actual town or village near the battle, and it is the climactic battle of the Eastern Front. But after this battle, the Germans never have the initiative again, and to some large extent, Hitler pulls forces from the aftermath of that battle because of what's going on in North Africa that then leads to everything we're talking about. Might be cool when this is all done if people have a rainy weekend, maybe line up the Pacific Band of Brothers and Masters of the Air and play the episodes in historical chronological order. That
Wow.
might be an illuminating
Holy cow.
see what's going on when. But okay, with that, let's go to closing ratings, and if you don't mind, we'll just keep the same format, right? I'll go first. And so I'm going to give this 3.5 stars, 3.5, we'll say. I was at 4 stars for the first 2 episodes. I really like this, but as I said in my review of the first one, Band of Brothers, which is my litmus test, my standard for how you tell this story, and I think that's fair because of these same guys are producing it. It was greater than the sum of its parts. So I'm going to give a provisional 3.5 stars because those things I mentioned that I felt they didn't include probably still would have gotten a 4. But as long as they start to bring out these concepts we talked about in future episodes, my rating after the fact will probably go up.
Okay.
And this could become a 4, but it's because I want to see them introduce us to these concepts over time.
That's right. That's exactly right. I'm going to give it I'm giving this one a 4. So Boyle's rating is a 4. I really like, so not quite a 5. So I'm still, I still think there's maybe some slight improvements to be done. Again, with the wider war aspect, I think there's probably a quick way to maybe cover that portion of it. Maybe that's my own bias. I really liked seeing the crew coordination aspects with the bailout scene that we saw here, how that worked. And although awful, seeing the different choices people had to make and the horrible decisions that these young men had to make in the heat of combat, although an awful depiction and horrible to see, I thought was really good to show that and bring that to the audience to really give it that realism, just how really gut-wrenching this was. So I'm going to give it a 4. And now to our final rating.
The final rating, the pride place for the show. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Which the whole reason we've been talking is to get
That's right.
this final rating, which was Zoe's rating.
Mm-hmm.
She gave it a 3.8.
Okay. So she split the difference between us without knowing.
Yeah, which went down. Again, she was clutching onto her pillow during the raid scene, and actually the whole time, the whole thing was super tense. We had to pause it when Kurt crashed and died.
Oh, yeah.
Because that was her favorite character up until now, and she was like, "I'm done watching. I'm done.
Yeah. I can't do this.
I can't take this.
Yeah,
I can't take this."
Yeah.
But she made it through. Sat back down. Made it through the rest.
Yep.
But what she didn't like, and I agree with her, was, at the beginning, unless you are like you and I, Roger, and you understand and you've read about this before, about the two-prong approach, what was the big deal with the weather and the other formation. The fighters weren't even mentioned at all, which only compounded what a goat rodeo this whole thing was.
Right.
But she was like, "What were they talking about with that different arrows?" Again, to your average person, I thought that was a little too quick. Didn't do it. They didn't land the punch there with how important it was to be synchronized and why the weather was so important. Just suddenly, like, oh, there's fog and people are smoking nervously, and the phone rings. Okay, launch. But you know, from her perspective, they didn't do a good job of really connecting what that all meant and why that's going to lead to bad things later on down the road. So 3.8 from Zoe.
All right. Awesome. Well, you know, I'm sure everything is complete. It's done out of post-production, but what you just said about Zoe's rating, I think illuminated something to me that if Mr. Hanks, Mr. Spielberg, if you're listening, you want to talk to Boyle and Roger about this, give us a holler. I just realized the piece I'm missing here from Band of Brothers, just to be an honest critic of this product, is I feel like we're not getting those end title credits that you'd get in Band of Brothers that would say this happened.
That's right.
I think that would just sort of wrap it up and give a little bit more of that impact.
It would. Yeah.
But all right. Well, always great talking to you, Boyle, and I'm looking forward to the episode this Friday. Again, boy, guys, things are going to get rough. So buckle up. But you know, it's always darkest before the dawn. So I'm really looking forward to the next bit.
I am too.
All right. We'll talk to you next week, Boyle.
Thanks, Roger.